Okay, thank you. So let us begin our today's seminar or today's webinar. First of all, I want to refer to the particular problem that we have faced regarding the beginning or starting of this particular webinar, that due to some technical reasons, some of the participants who have tried to join this webinar, they couldn't join beforehand, and now if they try, they can join after this particular section. That means after 3 p.m. and onwards. So let us begin then. Welcome all. For some technical reasons, the respected patron of this program, Sri Biman Krishna Saha, President of the governing body of Nabadwip Vidyasagar College, has not been able to join our program. He has gracefully sent his message through WhatsApp about the webinar. Let me read his message first and please listen. He writes, I am very much delighted to hear that Nabadwip Vidyasagar College has organized a one-day national webinar on post-colonial nationalism, theory and practice. I congratulate all the teachers of the Department of English and also Dr. Bhaskar Chatterjee, coordinator IQAC, who have taken such initiative. I also express my thanks and gratitude to all participants and resource persons. Hope this webinar will yield a grand success. Thank you all. Professor Rupen Mandal has to, I am requesting you to stop your presentation now. Thank you. Now, I would like to invite Dr. Swapan Kumar Rai, the principal of Vidyasagar College, to inaugurate this one-day national webinar titled Post-Colonial Nationalism, Theory and Practice, and deliver his welcome address. But I want all the participants to mute your audio, because if you do not help us, then it will be troublesome for us to conduct this webinar. All. Okay, sir, please.
Many thanks to the organizing committee of Nabadwip Vidyasagar College, particularly the Department of English, in collaboration with IQAC, coordinator Bhaskar Chatterjee. I express my thanks and gratitude to them. At the very beginning, my welcome address will be a portable one. That is, the welcome address has been segregated into three parts. First one, I actually express my thanks and gratitude to the resource persons. Firstly, the name who has joined from Ganga Singh College, which is affiliated to the Jayaprakash University. The name of the resource person is Kumkum Rai. And we are very much thankful to her because he has given his consent to address the seminar or to speak on the seminar title, webinar title, Nationalism, Post-Colonial Nationalism, Theory and Practice. Thereafter, I express my thanks and gratitude to Professor Shilpi Basak, who is from Sudhiranjan Lahiri Mahavidyalaya, Nadia. This college is also affiliated to the Colonial University. I also thank to him because of giving her consent to be a resource person. Second, congratulations, that is the participants. I actually express my thanks and gratitude to the participants who actually have registered to witness or to see the program webinar on the topic which I actually mentioned beforehand, post-colonial nationalism, theory and practice. All our participants, I actually thankful to them. Thirdly, I express my thanks to the actually members of the Department of English who are very much enthusiastic, who are very much interested, who are very much who actually have taken initiative to arrange such type of webinar. I actually thank to them. Practically, actually, Professor Dipanjan Ghosh, who is the mastermind or the cynosure of attraction in this regard. He has developed this idea actually after getting my consent. Then Dr. Arun Kumar Mondol, who is also the head of the department, Nabadwip Vidyasagar College, who will actually chair the session, first session. Our entire discussion, entire gamut of discussion has been segregated into two parts. Firstly, session 1, secondly, session 2. See, in session 1, Professor Kumkum Rai will deliver speech or give her lecture. Second part, Professor Shilpi Basak, who actually speak on the same topic, post-colonial nationalism, theory and practice. Now, in a gist, I just want to mention that firstly, session 1, keynote address will be given Dr. Arun Kumar Bishas, and the Dipanjan Ghosh will chair the session. In the second session, keynote address will be given or delivered by Professor Rupen Mondol, and the session will be chaired by Piyush Bhattacharya, and valedictory address will be given by Dr. Bhaskar Chatterjee, actually who is also the teacher of the chemistry department of chemistry, and he is the coordinator of IQAC. And these are the persons, majority or of the teachers, that is Arun Kumar Bishas, Piyush Bhadro, Dipanjan Ghosh, Rupen Mondol, are the teachers of Department of English. And another one, that is the Bhaskar Chatterjee, coordinator, who is also the teacher of the Department of Chemistry. From the core of my heart, I extend my thanks and gratitude to all of them for arranging such type of webinar. I think the Department of English will be a pioneer one, and after that, the other departments will actually follow the Department of English. Thank you all. Please
Thank you.
hand over to
Thank you,
Professor
sir.
Ghosh.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your active participation. Without you, we cannot organize this particular webinar. Now I would request Dr. Arun Kumar Bishas, head of the department, Department of English, Nabadwip Vidyasagar College, to deliver his keynote address to the first plenary session of today's discussion. Dr. Bishas.
Am I audible?
Yes,
Am I
Yes,
audible?
Yes, yes.
Yes. Okay. Good afternoon, dear participants and honorable resource person, Professor Kumkum Ray, our principal sir, Dr. Swapan Kumar Ray, and my dear colleagues. First of all, I would like to thank my colleagues for giving me such an opportunity to deliver the keynote address to this national webinar organized by Nabadwip Vidyasagar College. The title of this webinar is Post-Colonial Nationalism, Theory and Practice. The idea of post-colonial nationalism is the very concept of post-colonialism. Post-colonialism is a late 20th century critical theory that examines the human history and identity and culture and literatures of colonized societies and discourse of European imperial power from Foucault's concept of power structure and power dynamics. As a discourse, post-colonial criticism offers a systematic critical study of the power relationships between the previously colonized cultures and people and their colonizers, thus focusing on social, political, cultural operations from the colonized viewpoints. It seeks to find and reestablish their lost national cultural identity, history, and literature. Thus, it celebrates the suppressed, quote unquote, the other, and thus challenges the dominant cultures. Post-colonial theorists like Edward Said, Franz Fanon, Homike Bhabha, Gayatri Chakraborty Spivak are important post-colonial theorists. They believe that the colonizers, generally Europeans, impose their culture and values onto the colonized to educate them. This is what in Kipling's word is called the white man burden. The post-colonial theorists show how the West attempts to systematically refute or negate the existence, the cultural differences and values of quote-unquote the non-West or the other by exposing the Eurocentric universalism, which establishes Western superiority over the East or Orient. This binary between the Orient and Occident is what termed by Edward Said as Orientalism, which, according to him, is a Western style of or for dominating, restructuring, and having authority over the Orient. He explains how European and Western colonizers looked upon the Orient as a cruel, savage, and uncivilized, immoral, and etc. This is clear from different literary and cultural representations from Shakespeare to Conrad. The post-colonial critics rejects this concept of or claims to Western universalism or superiority. They rather points out, as Fanon does, the need of reclaiming one's own past, already erased in the process of colonization, as a part of cultural resistance. Thus, they acknowledge cultural ethnic differences and thus promote the notion of what Baba called cultural hybridity. Post-colonial theorists also analyze the process by which the colonized people resisted the colonizers, showing their rebellion and protest against anything related to the colonization and domination. For example, South Africa and India, the third world nations, resisted against their colonial powers. Now I'm trying to focus on post-colonial nationalism. So nationalism as an ideology has broader implications. Nationalism as a political concept has various dimensions, such as ethnic, liberal, language, cultural, marginal, religious, and post-colonial nationalism, and so on. Post-colonial nationalism developed mainly in those nations and the third world countries or nations like South Africa and India that have been colonized and exploited. The nationalism of these nations were forced through resistance to colonial hegemony in order to survive. As such, resistance is a part and parcel of such nationalisms, and their very existence is a form of resistance to imperialist and tyrannical intrusions. This notion of nationalism that has been growing up since the process of decolonizations that began to occur since Second World War asserts that the identities of third world peoples are authored and are constructed primarily by themselves, not colonial powers. So post-colonial nationalism as it addresses the questions of oppression, subjugation, and resistance. Post-colonial writers articulate the voice of this pain and resistance of the dominated nations, cultures, and people within their fictional and literary space, such as Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart, published in 1958. Indian English writers like Robin S. Nangam, for example, can be also read from the perspective of post-colonial nationalism. A witness to the intense cultural loss and identity that came with the negotiation with the other cultures. Nangam, depicts the voices of writers' protest and resistance to military violence and oppressions in Manipur, that is his homeland. So all these aspects of post-colonialism and post-colonial nationalism, the key issue of this webinar, I hope our resource person, Professor Kumkum Ray, and another resource person will focus on today. Finally, I hope this academic session with Professor Kumkum Ray will be an informative and enriching one. Thank you all. Over to our host. Hello.
Thank you,
Okay.
Dr. Biswas.
Welcome.
Okay. Now I would like to continue our discussion with Professor Kumkum Ray. First of all, as it has been already mentioned that I have to present this particular chair at this session. So let me begin with a small bio note. Professor Kumkum Rai is an assistant professor and head of the Department of English in Ganga Singh College, affiliated to the University, Chhapra, Bihar. Currently, she is pursuing her PhD from Benares Hindu University, and her PhD dissertation is on rereading South Asian identity from spatio-temporal aspects. She is interested to do further research in the broad disciplines of South Asian studies and identity politics. Now, I would like to invite Professor Rai to deliver her lecture. Professor Rai.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes, you are
Yes.
audible.
Yes.
Good afternoon, everyone. As we already know, the topic of today's discussion is post-colonial nationalism, and already Dr. Bishwas has given us a broader outlook regarding what is post-colonial nationalism. I'll be talking of nationalism through the lens of post-colonialism in Indian subcontinent. I'm sharing my slides. Are they visible? Hello?
Yes, they are visible, yes.
Okay. So, if we first take the term post-colonialism, we can see that the term post-colonialism has aroused a great amount of debate regarding how to write it. Whether it should be written with a hyphen as post-colonialism or a single unified word as post-colonialism. And we'll be also looking at what is the main difference between them and how this debate is an integral part of the conceptualization of post-colonialism. Now, if we take post-colonialism, we have the prefix post, which means behind or after. Hence, the term post-colonialism means anything that has happened or taken place when the colonization is over or after the end of colonial period, when the colonies got their due political independence. For India, it is 15th August 1947. However, if we consider post-colonialism as a critique of colonization, then this dates back as early as 18th century, where there were socio-political disruption in the colonies against the white imperial rule. And there was significant expression in the national newspapers and literature. Now, thus to encompass such a wide array of socio-political movement that unmask the colonial ideology, the term post-colonialism is used as a single word by most of the scholars. Though this term post-colonialism is widely used, still it's very difficult to delimit the term post-colonialism. As for the last 4 decades, it's been used extensively in the literary and cultural critiques of the empire and its consequences therein. We can take the definition of Gilbert Helen and Tomkin as they define the term post-colonialism according to a too rigid etymology is frequently misunderstood as a temporal concept, meaning that the time after colonialism has ceased or the time following the politically determined Independence Day on which a country breaks away from its governance by another state, not a naive teleological consequence which supersedes colonialism. Post-colonialism is rather an engagement with contestation of colonialism's discourses, power structures, and social hierarchies. A theory of post-colonialism must then respond to more than chronological construction of post-independence and to more than just the discursive experience of imperialism. Now, to form a working definition, we can say the term post-colonialism depicts the legacy of resistance against the socio-political and cultural oppression by the Western colonizers and how these experiences of dominance shaped the history, culture, politics of the people of both sides. It is also negotiates with the written history and asserts the position of native people even during the colonial rule. The resistance towards colonial oppression now gradually took the shape of anti-colonial nationalist consciousness in colonized nations across the class, gender, and ethnic groups. This growing sense of nationalist fervor eventually led to the formation of a number of nationalist parties by the intellectual elites. The political elites of these native states successfully crafted the nationalist movement and shaped and spread it among the common mass. Initially, these movements advocated the participatory politics between the Western colonizers and the native leaders. As in the case of India or other colonized states, the establishment of Indian National Congress December 1885 or African National Congress in 1913 provided a platform for the self-representation of the major issues faced by these native states and the people arising due to the and its people arising due to the malgovernance of their colonial masters. Thus, we can see the urge of existential proclaim was initially very limited on the part of native leaders, but rapidly it gained momentum and took a vigorous shape. Both the violent and non-violent movements became more confrontational. The demand for complete independence or Purna Swaraj, as in India, or Ujamaa in Tanzania, or Amandala in South Africa became more fervent. The liberation movement was no longer a political fascination of the social elites. Gradually, there was the rise of middle class following the dream of their political leaders and intellectuals like Gandhi, Nehru, and Subhas in India, or Frantz Fanon in Algeria, or Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana, etc. After the Second World War, the nationalist movements across the colonies became radical, and the growing militancy repeatedly shook the colonial powers. The expression of such revolutionary movements naturally found its path in literature, as in the writing of Rabindranath Tagore, Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay in India, or The Wretched of the Earth by Frantz Fanon in Algeria, etc. Tagore has expressed his thoughts on nationalism in various works, and the dream of a sovereign nation was propagated through many of his songs and poems among the general mass. Notable among them is a very famous Bengali song is Amra Shobai Raja Amader ei Rajar Rajotwe. The English rendering is we all are kings in the kingdom of our king. Otherwise, how else we would unite with him? নইলে মোদের রাজার সাথে মিলব কি শর্তে? He also continues saying that kingdom there would not be any slavery or fear of oppression. There might be differences of opinion, but the goal is always constant. That is a just and fair government in a free nation. There are many pieces of literature advocating such ideologies of a free nation by the contemporary vernacular writers and poets, which played a very vital role in mobilizing the mass against colonial subjugation and ultimately in throwing up the colonial rule. Now we will see post-independence nationalism. Political independence is basically a process of decolonization, where a colonized nation gains the power to form government without any intervention from the white colonizers. This is very crucial, as the political power may have shifted from the white Europeans to the native political elites. The native population is still not free from subjugation. Though apparently the common people got the power to cast their vote and elect their government, the ultimate outcome of every effort towards establishing a equal a state of equality ended up in political hierarchy and thus power corruption. As we have seen in the song by Tagore, the promising dream of sovereign nation state of equal rights for everyone without any social political hierarchy soon after independence failed. Instead, there was the emergence of new native rulers taking the place of white colonizers, who, like the earlier colonizers, started drafting laws and acts without the consent of the mass and was unacceptable among the various socio-religious groups. Now, this political negligence and in some parts, an inherent and natural tendency of domination gave rise to ethnic consciousness by strengthening ethnic identity of the people, which ultimately led to construct ethnic nationalism. The effect of these ethnic nationalism created a conflict with the prevailing civic nationalism. The decolonized nation state was not equally sensitive to the diverse issues faced as an independent nation. A counter-reaction to this conflict of opinion and friction between forces took place, and the national image was forcefully imposed upon various ethnic communities from the above instead of addressing their problems effectively and diligently. To cut down such insurgencies, the newly formed centralized government has instrumented state machineries like armed force, police, along with the political dominance. Now we will discuss or align our discussion to the poem The Strange Affairs of Robin S. Gangam, which is even prescribed in the UG syllabus. A major and direct impact of this separatist sense of ethnic nationalism can be seen in literature. Poems like The Strange Affairs of Robin S. Gangam vividly portrays the ethnic struggle of a politically neglected region over a long period of time after the nation gained political independence from the Western colonial rule. Robin Gangam belongs to Manipur, the northeastern part of India. The northeastern states or the Seven Sister states are connected to the mainland of India with a very narrow passage by making this part of alienated with the rest of the country. Now the geographical location, the ethno-religious cultural differences made the people of the northeastern part completely foreigners in their own nation. Therefore, questioning the national identity of the inhabitants of that region. By using his own name in the title of the poem, Gangam derives home the point of subjective narration attached to his personal experiences. He wrote about his own writings, mostly autobiographical, written with the hope of enthusing readers with my communal and kernel life, the life of a politically discriminated against and historically overlooked individual from the nook of a third world country. We can feel the anguish of political exploitation. At the beginning of this poem, he declared, "This is the story of my people, that is, the people of Manipur," and thereby hinting at the existing major and minor cultural differences and separating them from a unified national identity. The poem is highly political in its treatment of dealing with the conflict between the nation and the ethnic groups. The instrument of state dominance, that is the armed forces, is referred as the appliances of death and devastation, who turned their fabled homeland into a graveyard. The youth died in state-sponsored violence against the people is an assertion of power by the government. Heinous crimes like rape, extortion, ambushes are as habitual as the morning newspaper. Unraveling the harsh reality, Gangam proceeds to say that everyone has correctly identified the enemy of the people, but there is no other option than to keep silent, as revealing the name might further jeopardize the situation. The only option left to them is to mix the despair with the drink and be aloof from the reality. But towards the end, the poet urges his people to preserve their native customs, traditions, literature, and performing arts, and thereby writing their national history. Such helplessness was only evident during the colonial era. These differences has led to major resentment among the various ethnic groups residing in those regions. In fact, there are major cultural differences prevailing among the different ethnic and cultural groups in the Seven Sisters themselves, which are visible under a little introspection. It could also be observed that there is an underlying sense of tension among these groups, even though they are residing in the same state of India, and of course, among the locals belonging to different states. Imposition of dominant nationalism upon them from the above by the central government instead of being inclusive in terms of socio-political perspective has led to several mass uprisings which were often dealt with power than empathy. Now, if we look at the other neighboring countries, we can see a close look on the other neighboring countries of India. Similar kind of domination could be seen even after getting their respective political independence. Taking the example of Sri Lanka, the colonial force, the British rulers released their control over the island in 1948, leaving behind a politically unified Sri Lanka as a nation within diverse ethnic groups. The Singhalese, the Sri Lankan Tamils, the Sri Lankan Moors, Indian Tamils, Malayas, and Burjars. This wide range of differences spanning from language, religion, culture, heritage creates a tension of dilution and marginalization. This history of inter-ethnic tension gained momentum in the decolonized Sri Lanka in 1956, when the first Prime Minister passed a government act that made Singhalese the official language of the country. This act infuriated a civil unrest and ethnic friction, which evidently turned into a civil war between the Sri Lankan government and the Liberation Tigers of Tamilalam, that is LTT, which was dealt with inhuman brutality and mass genocide. Apart from all this ethnic nationalism, religious nationalism was also evident in Indian subcontinent. The All Indian Muslim League, a religion-based political party founded in 1906 in Dhaka, mobilized the Muslim mass to get a separate Muslim nation under the leadership of Muhammad Ali Jinnah. As a result, Pakistan was formed on 14th August 1947, constituting majorly the Muslim population of eastern and northwestern parts of British India. Now, very interestingly, this newly formed Pakistan, based on religion, had to face challenge in East Pakistan, now Bangladesh, since Urdu is spoken historically on the northern part of the subcontinent, whereas Bengali is the major and largely spoken language in the eastern part. As a result, linguistic nationalism upsurged by the rise of the Bengali nationalist against the officially imposed Urdu language, along with the other political negligences. In 1948, Jinnah declared that Urdu and only Urdu would be official language of the united Pakistan. The consequences of the protest faced by the people of East Pakistan were brutal. Pakistani military launched Operation Searchlight against the Mukti Bahini, that is the Liberation Army of Bangladesh, on 1971. The rural and urban areas of East Pakistan witnessed a rampant military operation, including massacre, abduction, deportation, and genocidal rapes. The war ended on 16th December 1971 after the surrender of West Pakistani Army, which resulted in the independence of People's Republic of Bangladesh. Thus, to conclude, it could be said that the concept of nationalism has its own journey through post-colonial, pre-independence, and post-independence era, and gradually transforming from a political ideology to a ethnocultural discourse by denoting specific identity of a group of people. Instead of that, nationalism always remains a part of liberation movement at its core. Nevertheless, from the discussion we can draw the point that the ghost of colonialism is always there even after the decades of independence. As rightly said by the famous Indian writer and activist Arundhati Roy, independence came and went, election come and go, but there has been no shuffling of the deck. On the contrary, the old order has been consecrated, the rift fortified. We, the rulers, won't pause to look up from our groaning table. Thank you. Thank you everyone for your patience.
Thank you, Dr. Roy. As now it is my duty to say something on your discussion, because I'm chairing at this moment. So first of all, I want to say something on, or I begin my words with some words by John Lennon. Okay, probably we heard the name of John Lennon, and there Lennon writes that imagine there is no countries. It isn't hard to do, nothing to kill or die for, and no religion too. Imagine all the people living life in peace. And as you know, that late 20th century English pop icon, John Lennon, his utopian pipe dream of a borderless ambrosial world openly links the absence of nations to freedom and peace. An innocent dream of a popular Western poet and musician evokes some disturbing images of the violence and destruction in recent human history, generated by one or the other notion of nation and nationalism. Almost immediately, the memories of unimaginable human suffering, pain, devastation implicit in the song disturb the listeners out of the smugness linked with the naturalness of living in nations. It also makes one conscious of the impossibility of escaping from the discourse of nations and nationalisms and of imagining life outside them. But before going to that, I must say that what do you feel or what do you mean by the concept of nationalism, and so far as nationalism is concerned in the typical post-colonial scenario? In the countries that once faced the colonial rule, that means to define post-colonialism and post-colonial nationalism for our students, because the students are also present in this particular meeting along with the erudite scholarly personages who are among us. So I must say a few words on it. In the countries that once faced the colonial rule, nationalism emerged as a political and intellectual movement where the nationalist leaders from different backgrounds shared a common interest in extricating the nation from colonial rule and in establishing an independent nation state, you see, that with a unified nation state. But after the quote-unquote independence, as we know, because the term independence is a very problematic term, because we cannot consider independence in the present scenario, whether we are truly independent or not. Or these are the matters of further questions or further queries that have to be answered in by us, actually. So quote-unquote independence, the common bond gets broken, you see, and the prevalent zeal that are challenged by divisive tendencies, some new, some historically entrenched. There emerge multiple internal nationalisms within a common ethnic frame, calling for spatial right or succession or secession, sorry. From the international perspective, because in this particular title, or the title of this seminar or webinar is theory and practice. So a bit of theory that I must include here, that must not be associated only with India, you see. Okay, something related to India, and at the same time there are other countries along with us. So what I'm trying to say here, that from the international perspective, let us think about Africa then. Okay, there are two patterns simultaneously existing there. So far as African countries are concerned, that I'm taking at this moment. First, there are countries like, say, Botswana or Namibia, Mauritius, and possibly South Africa, obviously, where you will find that the political systems continue to be characterized by the consolidation of a strong civic nationalist spirit, which reflects ties among political elites from different ethno-political backgrounds who share a commitment to common political rules and commitment itself. And second, there is another section. You see that there are countries like Somalia, Sudan, okay, or maybe think about the Democratic Republic of Congo, where the post-colonial nations has been marked by the degeneration of civic nationalist unity in the wake of typical parochial or ethnic nation-protecting political claimants, while narrowly based patrimonial regimes cling to power by a Praetorian centralist and exclusivist pattern or rule. To be specific, you see that following the chapter in a particular work, you see, following the chapter titled Nationalism in Post-Colonial States, okay, written by Joshua B. Forrest, and it was published in the book. It was a chapter from the book After Independence, Making and Protecting the Nation in Post-Colonial and Post-Communist States. It was edited by Barrington Lowell. He actually identified 6 key factors that can be traced that affect post-colonial nationalists' agenda. I must say that number 1, the failure to capture the entire perceived national homeland. It is number 1. Number 2, it is the presence of internal and external threats to territorial integrity and cultural survival. Number 3, the existence of threatened co-nationals abroad, because this particular thing of the present co-nationals are living abroad, and it can influence EU to some extent. Number 4, the colonial legacy of ethno-regional policy preferences, that is equitable or discriminatory. This is very important so far as India is concerned, you see. And that's number 5, it is the ethnic nationalists. And the last one that has been pointed out by the name that have been just mentioned. So the density of social structures and nature of traditional belief system. Among all these 6 factors, as we have mentioned just now, the post-colonial state's reaction to the ethnic and ethno-regional inequities engineered by colonial boundary makers has proven significant in setting the stage for the subsequent resolution of colonially created ethnic chasms, you see. India faces this situation, actually, as its post-colonial leaders immediately decided to annul the 580 princely states that existed at independence, replacing them with new provincial boundaries that didn't coincide with the older states. Although this initially precipitated a number of new insurgencies and sub-regional political movements, in the long run, this boundary restructuring also appeared to forestall more serious ethno-political strife and lay the social foundations for a relatively unifying civic nationalism. Actually, that is the fundamental thing that we have, Dr. Ray has, Professor Ray has pointed regarding Gangam, and also I know that this will be discussed in detail in the later part. The contrast is also there, you see, because in contrast to this, I must say that the consolidation of the civic nationalism has proven particularly challenging in Africa, because I am just taking a comparative analysis between Africa and India at this moment, where you can find that the state leaders have often elected to provide some preferential treatment to ethnic allies despite analytic claims regarding pluralistic tolerance. That is the fundamental problem. So that is the thing actually that I should say here. Thank you, Professor Ray, once again. And now there is the matter with the questions. Actually, in the group, we cannot find any particular question because there are some technical problems that persons are facing regarding joining this particular webinar. As you can see here, only 94 candidates have joined, and there are a lot of persons who are actually falling from joining. So if there is any particular question that is here, I actually in the chat box there are some questions. We cannot take much more questions, but we can find something. Okay.
Deepanjan,
yes.
I would like to take this question by Srijita Vishwas.
Okay. Okay. So the question is, she writes that, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Srijita Vishwas, student of BHU, Department of English. I would like to know from Professor Ray, how can one explain nationalism in India based on religious imposition in similar patterns of language impositions as implied in your presentation? Is the secular description attributed to India a theory for the nation state? So that is the question that she asks, and now it is your answer.
Okay, Srijita, this is a very tricky question, I must say, because all the national diversity I have discussed in my presentation, that is ethnic nationalism, religious nationalism, linguistic nationalism, all are present in India. Like, this is a very diverse country. So we can see all the conflicts. Now, your question is whether the term secular in the description should be rightly used or not. Like, see, like democracy, for me, it's absolutely my opinion. Like democracy, secularism is also ideal state. We try to attain that, but there are conflicting forces. Like we can see when Pakistan formed by the Muslim League, by the majoritarian Muslims, exactly on the binary, there is a conception of Hindu Rashtra. Like if we place this two religion in binary, when Muslim League formed their own nation state, the demand of forming Hindu Rashtra, and we all know the notion, the concept formed by Savarkar, the Hindutva, was very fervent in Indian politics, and we have this Sangh family who are propagating and spreading the ideology of Hindu Rashtra. So this religious nationalism is very much flowing latently in Indian polity. But as we have declared in our constitution that we will move forward to a secular country, so we must say this country is a secular country. It should be a secular country with equal rights for all the religion, and language imposition. It is also very conflicting in nature. It's basically the majority rules, and that is what taking place in India. But I think it is not that much binary. Any other question? Hello?
Okay, can you find any other one? Anything else? There is a question from Tirthankar Sengupta. Madam, I would like to know as to how do you look at the ethnic separatist movements that is going on currently in different parts of various countries. If the demand for assertion of cultural autonomy does not necessarily demand for political autonomy, will you still call it colonial or post-colonial?
Actually, I have discussed it very vividly in my presentation that the colonial subjugation is under disguise during this decolonized nation, and we are not talking about liberating all the cultures as all the cultural group as autonomous nation or autonomous nation state, but we are talking about um, inclusion and cultural representation. There should not be any imposition, cultural imposition. Like we can see very recently that what should be eaten or what should not be eaten is also somehow very latently imposed upon the people, and people are not um, free to express their opinion. This should not happen, and this is somewhere colonial in nature, not post-colonial, colonial in nature. Though in a decolonized nation.
Okay. Then let us find a third one. Some Prince Shornokar. Yes. Prince Shornokar writes, Madam, is there any conflict in terms of ethnic and civic imaginary nationalism before arrival of colonial power? How far rise of anti-colonial nationalist consciousness led to the growth of pan-Indian patriotism?
It's also a very relevant question, because if we see the pre-colonized era, we can see very small ethnic groups, and that is very loosely connected to an emperor. There is no such direct dominance over these small ethnic groups, and there is no sense of nationalism, Indian nationalism before the British colonization. And I have problem with this imaginary, because civic nationalism is very much written, discussed, and officialized, but ethnic nationalism is something that we inherit from our ancestors. Hope I have answered that question. Any
Okay.
other question?
Any other question is there? I don't know. I have to find. No, probably not. Okay. So up to this then. Thank you. And now it is the time for the second session. Thank you, Professor Rai.
Thank you, Dipanjan. Thank you, Nabadwip College, for giving me this opportunity.
Okay. So it is the second session, and due to the time constraints, it will not be possible to address all the questions. Therefore, she will take 3 or more relevant questions here, and the rest could be asked here through the WhatsApp group that we have already created, and you can send the messages there, and it will be answered by our resource person there. So now it is the second session, and in this particular session, Professor Rupen Mandal, Assistant Professor, English Department, he will deliver the keynote address to the second plenary session of today's discussion. Now I would like to invite Sri Rupen Mandal to deliver the keynote address to this session. Rupen Mandal, yes.
Thank you, Dipanjan. Can you hear me right now? Am I audible to all of you?
Yes, yes, yes.
Yes. All right. So thank you, Dipanjan, and thank you, Professor Kumkum Rai. And I would like to take this occasion to sort of convey my best wishes and regards to all my colleagues, my friends, my students, and all my fellow journeymen of the unfathomable sea of literature who have graced us with their presence. Now, when this webinar was announced or sort of conceived, we have always had a discussion as to how the technicalities will work out. So far, it's okay, and we have a very good technical team in place. They are, trying their best to admit everyone into this meeting, and I hope this second session will see some more participation and more people will join us and to see what we do and what we say right here in this webinar. Now, this topic that we are speaking on, it's about post-colonial nationalism. Now, post-colonialism is quite the term in these days, because whether it's literary theory or it's cultural theory or it's literature in general, the post-colonial term has caught on to quite a bit. But before I move on into post-colonialism or post-colonialism, which is the kind of thing that's even more relevant right now, I would like to present to you a photo which was taken in 1904, and it's like this. Well, can you see the photo?
Yes.
Yes. Now, this photo is from Congo. Now, at that time, that is, it's probably taken in the first half of the 19th century or 1870 probably. I don't know, the exact date isn't mentioned. This photo is very readily available on the internet. It's called, if you search by N Sala of Wala. Now, as you look at the photo, you can see an African man sitting on the porch of a veranda looking at some objects in front of him. Now, this photo has a very gruesome story. Now, Belgium was colonizing Congo. It already had colonized Congo, and it was actually brutalizing Congo. How? Now, Congo had rubber plantations, and the Belgians were doing their best to get whatever they can from Congo. Now, this person in the photo, this photo was taken by Alice Seeley. She was the wife of an American reverend, a pastor, who was working clandestinely in Congo to some sort of photo document the things going on, and they were trying their best to let the world know what colonization, oblique brutal colonization of Congo was doing to its people. Now the objects in front of the man's name is Nsala, Wanasala, whatever, and he's a resident of the Songo district of Congo, of the Congo of those days. What he is looking at are the severed, cut off hands and legs of his own daughter. Now, the colonizing people, that is, they are in Bangla what we call Prabhu, that is, their lords, the people who had colonized Congo, they had set a quota for the production of rubber, and unfortunately, our Nsala, that is the Sala of the person who is in the photo, he had somehow missed the quota. He had come short of the target, and in order to punish him, the colonizers, that is the forces of the so-called Belgian Congo police, they had severed the hands and legs of his daughter. Now, this is the kind of brutal treatment that colonization actually afforded us. In our very own Bengal, if we look at Dinobandhu Mitro, Nil Dorpon in particular, we can understand the kind of economic and industrial enterprise that colonization was. Now, are we off with it? We might think that we are quite right. That is, things are different now, and it's not about, it's not about colonies anymore. But there are certain things that are going on right now. If you look at the airwaves right now, that is, the thing that's very hot in media and social media is Ladakh. What is China doing in Ladakh? Now, colonialism, that is, though we are living in a post-colonial age, colonialism, I think, in my opinion, it's not over yet. It's the age of neo-colonialism. It's the age of debt diplomacy. Countries like China and other economically very surplus kind of countries, they are doing something like they are extending loan and credit to poor countries. And in the end, they are somewhat, sort of making them some sort of economic colonies. This has happened in Congo. This has happened in Ghana and Namibia. And even in Pakistan's Balochistan, there are people of the Baloch revolutionary movement. They say that our country has sold us to China. Now, in Galwan Valley, our soldiers have died trying to protect Indian sovereignty. Of course, this is something of a total different thing. But in every aspect of our worldly life in these times, we can see the advent of neo-colonialism. So whenever we study post-colonialism, the emphasis is also on colonialism as the thing that has preceded this post thing, that is. And we must also maintain this very simple fact that colonialism isn't dead yet. It will, and it has come back somehow. And we are seeing those things all around. There is globalization. There is the globalization of the economy. And every poor economy is vulnerable to be colonized economically by a bigger economy. It's some sort of matshannai in Bangla. That is the big fish eating the lesser fish or the smaller fish. Anyway, this much for the introduction, or my, sort of my take on colonialism and post-colonialism. And of course, when we look at the things that go on right around us, we can also understand that colonialism has, the post-colonial story, that is the post-colonial story of the colonized nations, they have also somehow given us a new kind of thing to worry about, that is nationalism in a toxic form. A number of participants have asked about jingoism and in the previous questioning session, and that is also a headache that we have to sort of go on taking nowadays. Anyway, this is the keynote address that I am supposed to give, and thank you all for listening to me. The next session is by Professor Shilpi Basak, who is an assistant professor of Mahavidyalaya College, and she is quite well known to us. A number of times I have met her in Kolkata University about sort of taking scripts from the examination department, and well, so I am looking forward to it, looking forward to hear her speak. And with this, I would like to turn the mic over to Sri Dipanjan Ghosh and to proceed with the next proceedings that we have in our webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Sri Rupen Mondal. In this second plenary session, the speaker will be Professor Shilpi Basak, and the session will be chaired by Professor Piyush Bhadra, Assistant Professor, English Department, Nabadwip Vidyasagar College. Now I would like to hand the microphone over to Professor Bhadra and request him to take the chair. Professor Bhadra. Professor Bhadra, can you hear me?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, audible now.
Yes, so please, I request Professor Shilpi Basak to speak and present our presentation, and afterwards then I will speak about the topic and review that speech, and I will also take the questions and discuss with and hand over the questions to Professor Shilpi Basak. So Professor Shilpi Basak, please go ahead. Thanks.
Thank you, Piyush. I hope I am audible.
Yes.
Okay. At the very outset, I'd like to thank the organizer for giving me this opportunity to share my views about select Indian texts in the light of post-colonial nationalism. Is the slide readable? Hello?
No, it is not. The presentation is not being begun actually.
Okay.
No, we can't see the presentation.
Yes, now it began.
Okay. So, as you see that post-colonial and nationalism, these are very vast terms. In fact, in many universities across the globe, there are separate departments for the two, like Department for Post-Colonial Studies or Department for Nationalism Studies. Again, these two terms or discourses traverse across various disciplines like history, anthropology, political science, and so on and so forth. So it is very obvious that the coupling, that the conjunction of the two terms will create multiple meanings and significations. But for the present webinar, I will limit my discussion to the Indian context and will try to show how post-colonial nationalism has been represented in select Indian texts. For this, I have chosen some texts primarily from the CBC's UG syllabus under University of Kolkata. Now, let me begin the discussion by defining the term nationalism. Srinivas Iyengar, we all know him, is the most popular figure, and his history of Indian English writing is till date the most popular one. However, he describes nationalism thus: nationalism is an awakening of a nation to self-consciousness. Now, this definition leads us to another question: what is nation? Now, thinkers as early as Ernest Rene argues that nations are not natural entities and that it is constructed. Benedict Anderson, another theoretician, also defines nation as that nation is an imagined political community. I'd also like to refer Tagore here, our own Tagore. He he has written several essays on nation and nationalisms. I am quoting him from his 1901 essay, Nation Ki. This was written in Bengali. He wrote, "Nation ekti সজীব সত্তা, একটি মানস পদার্থ." If we translate it, it would be like nation is a living entity, a desire for living together. Now, in order to understand nation, we need to differentiate it from state. Now, in simple terms, state is major political subdivision of the globe, which can be readily defined and conceptualized in quantitative terms. On the other hand, the essence of nation is intangible. William Connor describes this essence as psychological bond that joins people and differentiates it in the subconscious conviction of its member from all other people in a most vital way. He continues, nation is a social group with common ideology, common institutions, custom, and a sense of homogeneity. Now, the nation state, it is a very modern coinage. Partho Chatterjee, in a lecture, said that the superimposition of state on nation is a very modern idea. And Benedict Anderson also argues on the same line that nation state is the final form of nation. Now, I will move to the point how nation and nationalism is connected with post-colonial countries. As Dipanjanda said in his keynote address, that the nationalism in post-colonial countries actually emerged as a corollary of anti-colonial nationalism or resistant nationalism. It was a kind of political and intellectual movement which was mainly led by some social elites who have a common interest to liberate the nation from colonial rule and establishing an independent nation state with a distinct, united national identity. Now, it is interesting that nationalism itself emerged emerged as a ramification of imperialism or expansionism. For example, France, England, Spain, all European powers started to expand their national domination over countries of the New World. This process ultimately culminated in annexation of colonies and their eventual amalgamation into the respective empires. Now, it is important to talk about two major types of nationalism across the world: civic nationalism and ethnic nationalism. This is actually according to the nature of belonging. Now, civic nationalism is defined by common citizenship, regardless of ethnicity or race, color, religion, gender, language. And in a civic nation, citizens are united in a patriotic attachment and they share a set of political practices and values. And here, in a civic nation, it is said that it is individual that creates nation. On the other hand, in ethnic nationalism, nationalism is defined by language, religion, customs, and traditions. Here, the binding force is not shared political rights as that of civic nationalism, but here the binding force is the pre-existing ethnic characteristics. As such, the ethnic nationalists claim that the nation, the community exists first, and the state is created later in order to serve them. Now, sometimes we will see that civic nationalism and ethnic nationalism collude, and sometimes these two collide. The first case, the first that is when it collude, we can see these in Czechoslovakia or in Scotland or Switzerland. The latter is visible in today's India and Israel. Now, there is obvious distance between the theory and the praxis, between the rhetoric and the reality. In most cases, we will see that the common bond that had been crafted during the course of the independence movement was subsequently challenged by divisive tendencies. Ernest Rene, for this, argues that the instability of nation as an inevitable consequence of its constructed nature. He says that the instability of nation is actually the cause of its constructed nature. He says, I quote, myth of nationhood must by ideology perpetuates nationalism, in which specific identifiers are employed to create exclusive and homogeneous conceptions of national traditions. Such signifiers of homogeneity always fail to represent the diversity of the actual national community for which they purport to speak, and in practice usually represent and consolidate the interests of the dominant power group. In fact, practically if we see that in any nation, there can never be a nation can never be full of homogeneous people across a particular geopolitical territory, and this gives rise to majority and minority. And the moment any nation or nationalism is based on majority, then there comes the policy of exclusion, which in its turn gives rise to the voices of dissent. Now, Aijad Ahmed rightly observes that often majoritarianism parades as nationalism. In Indian perspective, Indian nationalism more than often is critiqued as the upper class Hindu male nationalism. So, the class, religion, gender, these factors also define the nature of belonging in a multi-religious, multicultural country and creates different kinds of minorities based on class, religion, gender, caste, language, ethnicity, etc. The excluded group, now they feel deprived, neglected, and they raise voice of protest, demanding the right of self-determination, which is one of the key features of nation state, that the right of self-determination. Now, in India, the ethnic and regional inequities was first actually engineered by colonial boundary makers, whose arbitrary policy of map making has thrown significant challenge for the civic nationalisms. If we see the map, we will see that the white portions were actually native Indian states, and they were never under the British rule. They were princely states. But after independence, what happened? The national leaders assumed that automatically these territories will be under the periphery of newly independent nation state. And it was decided to annul all the princely states replacing them with new provincial boundaries. The new boundaries obviously did not coincide with the older autonomous states. There were rebellion, there were voices of protests, and the insurgent movement or separatist movement of Kashmir or of Tamilians or of several northeast states are actually offshoot of these. However, we must admit that each case is different from other, and each of the case needs separate discussion. I'm not going to that. I will directly now go to the point that how the nation question is represented in literature. Now, literature responds to the nation question mainly through two ways. It either valorizes or critiques. The first one, that is valorization of nation, mainly happened during the writing of colonial period or during the early period of decolonization. But in contemporary period, what we see that post-colonial literature actually proves and problematizes the idea of nation. It interrogates the nation and nationalism as political, cultural, and historical entities and problematizes the notion of nation and nationalism. They show that how the post-colonial nations actually failed to deliver the promise of equality and justice. And they also show how the post-colonial nations are at a distant remove from the earlier conception of the idea of nation in anti-colonial discourses. Thus, they have also brought to the fore the new margins as they are conceived on majoritarian lines, and in the process, they uphold the cause of those marginalized other. And they show that when any ethnic or religious or linguistic group, for that matter, don't conform to the idea of nation as conceived by majority, as conceived on the majoritarian line, they or their voice are termed as anti-national. They are marginalized and they are termed as other. Now, so far I was talking about the theoretical part. Now I will move to the praxis part. As I said in the very beginning, that I will situate some select texts in the matrix of post-colonial India. Now, the first text I have chosen is Diderot's "To India, My Native Land." Now, there might be questions why I choose this text, which actually was written in colonial India. Here, I will take resort to Bill Ashcroft's definition of post-colonialism. I quote him, "We use the term post-colonial to cover all the culture affected by the imperial process from the moment of colonization to the present day. This is because there is a continuity of preoccupations throughout the historical process initiated by European imperial aggressions." Now, I am also using the term post-colonial in the same line. I am not using it using hyphen as a temporal marker. In fact, as I see it, that post-colonialism is an ism that actually interrogates the point of intersection between colonized subjectivity and colonizers' ideology. So, coming to the poem, here it is. The poem is, as you can see, is explicitly nationalistic in tone. And as a part of the voicing nationalism, it actually glorifies the past. And this aspect of nationalism can be marked as resistant nationalism or anti-colonial nationalism, which I referred earlier. The first three lines, as you can see, my country, in thy day of glory past, a beauteous halo circled round thy brow, and worshipped as a deity thou wast. The lines speak of nationalism in the sense that they generate pride in historical past of India among the Indians. The poet juxtaposes the past glory with the present destitute. Where is that glory? Where that reverence now? Thy eagle pinion is chained down at last, and grovelling in the lowly dust art thou. Thy minstrel hath no wreath to wave for thee, save the sad story of thy misery. Needless to say, the lines purport to awaken the consciousness of the nation among its citizens and calls for reformation. And here I would like to uh, remind you that Dirogio, along with Raja Rammohun Roy, was a great reformer. And Dirogio was a reformer plus a patriot. The patriotic poet here laments that the country has lost its glory and he holds the British rule responsible for this. The country, which needs to be treated with reverence, is chained down at last. The misery of being subjugated to the colonizers is brought to the fore since it has started, quote unquote, groveling in the lowly dust. The lines also remind us of another poem of Dirogio, The Harp of India. I quote, neglected, mute, and desolate art thou, like ruined monument on desert plain. The poet feels necessity for cultural and historical roots, which can be called revivalism or nativism, which is another part of post-colonial nationalisms. Now, the line, well, let me dive into depths of time. Now, the depths of time is significant because it is connotative of historical consciousness. Revival of the sublime, the penultimate line, uh, revival of the sublime as a means to assert identity, identity of the self, and at the same time, identity of the nation, is also one of the features of nationalistic writing. Now, the next poem I chose is an introduction. We all are familiar with the poem, and this is generally considered as one of the most famous feminist poem, but I will here highlight those portions from the poem that are in some way or the other is uh, related to our topic, post-colonial nationalism. Now, at the very beginning of the poem, the poet announces that I don't know politics, but I know the names of those in power and can repeat them like days of week or names of months, beginning with Nehru. Now, beginning with Nehru, this is very interesting. It should be noted that Kamala Das was born in 1934 and married at the early age of 13. So in 1947, she was already married, and it may be presumed that at that age, she must have the knowledge of colonial period and its rulers. So this willful negation of colonizers is an important feature of post-colonial writing. In a post-colonial nation, particularly a multicultural nation like India, the identity of an individual is formed and informed by various factors: the place she comes from, the gender she performs, the language she speaks, and so on and so forth. The poet boldly asserts herself as Indian, very proud, born in Malabar. And then I speak 3 languages, write in 2, dream in 1, etc. Here, she situates herself by using nationality, it is Indian, complexion, very brown, place of birth, born in Malabar, and the languages she knows. Further, Dashi's English is her English, which she appropriated. She says, the language I speak becomes mine, etc. In this respect, I would like to quote Kamala Dashi's statement. She once wrote about her use of English that language has no color and it does not observe the rigid rules of narrow patriotism. It serves anybody who chooses to serve it. Hence, the line, the language I speak becomes mine. Now, the living language, as she said, that it is as human as I am human, the living language of the poet can be termed hybrid after Baba, which is written on a third space unique to each individual. A post-colonial nation, in many ways, a gendered nation also, where patriarchy rules. They here obviously refers to the patriarchy. A post-colonial woman is chained in the hand of patriarchy. Besides being under the influence of colonizers, she is also a puppet in the hand of patriarchal nation or gendered nation which prioritizes the cause of man. We are reminded here of Spivak's famous postulation about women in post-colonial nation, double imprisonment of women. The poet's rebellion against the set norms of patriarchy can be read as rebellion against the tyranny of colonizers. The concluding sentence, I too call myself I, significantly refers to the self-other binary which is instrumental in the dominant ideological discourse. Now, the next one is Amitabh Ghosh's The Ghost of Mrs. Gandhi. It is a retrospective article looking back to a past colored by blood. Like his novel The Shadow Lines, which moves into the issue of ethnic nationalism, this article also highlights the ethnic violence in the post-colonial India. The article starts thus: nowhere else in the world did the year 1984 fulfill its apocalyptic portents as it did in India. Separatist violence in the Punjab, a military attack on the great Sikh temple of Amritsar, the assassination of the Prime Minister, Mrs. Indira Gandhi, riots in several cities, etc., etc. Now, for the uninitiated, mainly for the students, I will narrate a small history. The secessionist movement of Punjab, known as the Khalistan movement, demanding separate state for Sikh, took violent form during late 1970s and 1980s, resulting large-scale violence and deaths of many. To combat the rebellion of the pro-Khalistan separatists, the then Prime Minister Indira Gandhi sent military force to the Golden Temple of Amritsar, the most sacred site for Sikhs. This is known as Operation Blue Star. This in turn claimed the life of the Prime Minister, killed by her personal security guards, they were Sikhs, in revenge for her having sent troops to raid the Sikhs' Golden Temple in Amritsar earlier that year. The assassination of the Prime Minister triggered anti-Sikh riots across North India, and suddenly the Sikhs become quote-unquote anti-national. Salman Rushdie, in his book Imaginary Homelands, wrote about the period in his characteristic style. I quote, there were no Indians as patriotic as the Sikhs. Until 1984, you could say that the Sikhs were the Indian nationalists. Then came the storming of the Golden Temple and the assassination of Mrs. Gandhi, and everything changed. In Delhi, angry Hindu mobs decided to hold all Sikhs responsible for the deeds of the assassins. Thus, an entirely new form of communal violence, Hindu-Sikh riots, came into being. And in the next 10 days, the Sikh community suffered a series of traumatizing attacks from which it has not recovered and perhaps never will. This very well reflects the reality of multi-ethnic, multi-religious nation-state like India, where the majoritarianism rules under the mask of equality and equal rights and security. Mr. and Mrs. Bauer suddenly were the others, the excluded one from the quote-unquote national imaginary. They were torn between terrorists in Punjab on the one hand and the Indian government on the other. The writer argues that human rights documents such as the pamphlet titled Who Are Guilty, circulated after the violence, is the only human possibility available to people who live in multi-ethnic, multi-religious societies like those of the Indian subcontinent. Another instance of majoritarianism is found in the text where the writer narrates that a certain color was denied to apply because it was associated with a certain religion. I quote from the text. In Bombay, local government officials want to stop any public buildings from being painted green, a color associated with the Muslim religion. And more significantly, the statement, it is imperative that the government ensure. Hello? Is it all right?
Yes, yes, everything's okay.
Okay. By writing about the incident, the writer draws attention to the injustice to humans in post-colonial nations. Now, I will move to the next slide. Though Professor Kumkum has said a lot about this, I will only refer to I will talk a very small amount on it. So, in any discourse, Robinus Gangam is a poet from Northeast. You have already known that, and he's from Manipur. Now, in any discourse on the Indian nation state, it is seen that the Northeast has been always seen as the other. And this particular poem is overtly political and showcases the conflict between civic and ethnic nationalism. The introductory lines, for example, not once can I say I'm the captain behind the wheel of fire. It voices the loss of self-control, which in the terminology of the discourse of nationalism can be called the right of self-determination, or here the absence of it. The poet chronicles the saga of his people, which is full of pathos, despair, and pain born out of disillusionment and helplessness. In the name of nationalism, the political party at center are doing something what once the colonizers did to colonized natives, kind of neo-colonialism that Rupenda was talking about. I quote from a poem, soldiers with black skirts, like mime artists, turned them in seconds into shrouds. The graves of youths who died in turmoil are the only milestones to the city. Instead of the mask of your being, I inhale the acrid smoke of gelignite and pyres. Now, as I said earlier, that in the very poem, we see the instance where civic and ethnic nationalism collides. And so, the very word patriotism connotes different meaning for different people. One meaning for the Indian military forces who are fighting for nation, and another meaning for the separatist people who are also fighting for a separate territory. So, patriotism is the need of the hour. Patriotism is preaching secession and mourning our merger with a nation. Obviously, this is indicating the annexation of princely states with the just independent Indian nation. Patriotism is honoring martyrs who died in confusion. Patriotism is declaring we should preserve native customs and traditions. This is obviously talking about revivalism or nativism. Our literature and performing arts, etc., etc. Patriotism is proclaiming all men are brothers and secretly depriving my brother. So, now I will conclude my discussion of texts with Agha Said Ali. He is a poet, is a diasporic poet from Kashmir. Now, it is significant that how the notion of nationality changes under the impact of new intellectual currents being prompted by the growth of transnationalism, internationalism, and globalization. Benji Jain argues, I quote, as the global interconnectedness grows rapidly, what was historically considered as national spheres has been diluted by transnational diaspora, and what was remembered as home hence no longer exists within a nation but as notes of international, unquote. Now, Aga Said Ali is known mostly for introducing and popularizing ghazal in the English-speaking world. His appropriation of ghazal, a poetic form, originated in the East, Arab to be precise, into a Western language, English, in a way, bridges his home country, India, with his host country, America. Now, his hybrid identity, because he was simultaneously Kashmiri, Indian, American, Shiite, Muslim, thus is exemplified through the hybrid poetic form ghazal. And I have here chosen his particular ghazal named By Exiles. Here, this is dedicated to Edward Shright, who was another exile from Palestine. Now, in the poem, what Ali does, he universalizes the exile situation, where he brings together three places, Hudson, Kashmir, and America from three continents. By the Hudson lies Kashmir, brought from Palestine. Significantly, the situation of Jerusalem, the city of God, is very similar to that of the poet's homeland. Jerusalem is the bone of contention between two countries, Israel and Palestine, just as Kashmir is the apple of discord between two nations, India and Pakistan. Now, I'll directly come to the conclusion. What is the future? It is a paradox that when terms like globalization, transnationalism, and post-nationalism is being in currency, is gaining currency and acceptance, nationalisms are re-emerging all over the globe with sheer tenacity. The recent outbreak of violence in different universities in India or the other part of the world in the name of nationalism is proof of that. Aggressive assertion of culturalisms frequently come in the way of wider international solidarity. Stuart Hall, among others, is salutary in his warning that the assertions of dissident culturalisms should at best be regarded as a necessary fiction or as a form of strategic essentialism relevant only to the particular exigencies of the colonial counter. After colonialism is over, Hall suggests that it is imperative to imagine a new transformation of social consciousness which exceeds the reified identities and rigid boundaries invoked by national consciousness. Postcolonialism, in other words, ought to facilitate emergence of what we might call enlightened post-nationalism. Edward Said also says, in the same line, and I will end my discussion with the quote from, of Scheid. He says that nativism is not the only alternative. There is the possibility of a more generous and pluralistic vision of the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Basak. Now I hand over to Professor Bhadra to say something on it. Professor Bhadra, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me? Hello? Can you hear me and see me as well?
Yes, yes.
Yes. So first of all, I would like to thank our principal, sir, Dr. Kumar Roy, who has occasioned this. Without his support, we would not have been possible to arrange such grand, successful event. And also, I also thank both the presenters, both the speakers. They have, in a sort of way, tried to, and also successfully have grasped our content, the content of the seminar, that is post-colonial nationalism. And since it's my honor to chair Professor Shilpi's session, let me say something about it, that she has, in a way, in a very comprehensive way, and in a very exclusive way, tried to grasp all the aspects of nationalism, including pre and post. If we see her presentations, we see that the way that she has selected text from pre-colonial text to post-colonial text, we find that she has tried to present a holistic approach towards nationalism. And the way she has analyzed the text, I think it's very essential, not only to the teachers, but also to the students, since we're part of University of Kalani and we teach also the same curriculum. Now, coming back to the notion of nationalism, which what I find from Mrs. Shilpi's presentation, that she has taken a very interdisciplinary approach towards this concept, nationalism. And she has traversed all across pre to post, and even the present postmodern scenario. And as earlier, Dipanjan and Rupen pointed out, that we must have a very interdisciplinary and global look. But since this discourse is only specific about certain post-colonial perspectives, we can't have so many speakers and so many perspectives on so many texts. So in a way, nationalism, I think it's very outdated term, I think. Why? Because the term nationalism has been present, was present, I think, before 16th or 17th century European discourse. Although in different terms, they use different terms. And if you follow Hugo Grotius and Hans Kahn, you'll find that this notion has been very popular for the rulers and for the politically powerful segments of that part of that nations, to channelize the sentiment, to channelize that actually this, what I call an ideology, ethnicity, whatever you call, or racism, to manipulate their power, to manipulate colonialism. Now, if we come back to India, we'll find that even in British era, even in colonial era, nationalism has had a different definition, a different approach. And the same nationalism cannot be relevant today, since the culture, the context, the history, everything has changed. Now, I can't help here mentioning the name of Michel Foucault, actually, who was, who I think the greatest modern thinker, as far as I believe. Foucault said that no idea, no truth can be fixed. It can be fixed by, it can't be eternal. Since nationalism, if you follow this concept, nationalism in Kenya, you'll find that most of the African nations, most of the subcontinent nations in Middle East Asia, most of the nations even in some countries like Bosnia, Kazakhstan, you find these ethnic clashes happening, and these clashes often collide with the concept of nationalism. So what is the definition of nationalism? Can it be just categorized as ethnicity, or can it be just considered as linguistic concept? Can it be considered as a cultural notion? No, I think no term, no aspect is enough to define. So since I don't find any, I think there is no significant question from these. Let me find out if there is any question or are any questions. So I will try to present. Yes, I think there is one question, and yes, that is from someone, Mrs. Suhas Roy, and he wants to know certain texts, certain post-colonial Bengali novelist post-colonial texts which deal with nationalism. So over to Professor Shilpi, if you can just mention, or otherwise we'll, we can say that since our time is very restricted, we can't deal with all these questions, and there is not many questions, I think.
No,
So,
actually,
okay,
we can. Hello.
Yes.
Hello.
Yes, we can take 3 questions, okay? Because
Yes,
there
and
will
I
be
don't
delay.
think there are many questions. There I find only one question.
Okay.
Only one question. So if Professor Shilpi likes to address that question, okay. And
Okay.
otherwise, we'll move forward to our next
Uh,
session.
okay, I'm trying. Regarding Bengali literature's response to nationalism, that is the question.
Yes, yes. So some examples, some texts, Bengali texts or Bengali novel,
Uh,
post-colonial.
we can think of obviously Rabindranath Tagore. He had
Oh, yeah.
written
Yeah,
several essays.
some post-colonial texts.
Obviously, Tagore or Dijendralal Rai. If we think post-colonialism as the intersection between the colonizers and the colonized, then
Yes,
Dijendralal Rai, Tagore, even Diderot all come under the ambit of post-colonial literature. So,
yes,
if we see that Dijendralal Rai's famous song, "Dhana Dhanne Pushpe Bhara," so
yes,
that is also very significant and loaded with ideology because there he said that ধনধান্যে পুষ্পে ভরা আমাদের এই বসুন্ধরা সকল দেশের রানী সেজে আমার জন্মভূমি. So what he does, he wants to prioritizes, he wants to glorify his motherland at the cost of belittling others. So this is also a kind of obviously we know that his and Bankim Chandra, they were all kind of upholding the what we say the Hindu nationalism, and they were particularly Bankim Chandra Chatterjee's idea of nation and his imagination of the nation as a goddess, as a Hindu goddess, was obviously very evident. The fact
yes,
that he was thinking on that line.
yes, yes. So you are right. Post-colonialism is not just a historical era. It must be seen in terms of cultural, conceptual, ideological perspective. And the last thing that I want to mention is that nationalism must be seen from the perspective of phenomenology. Actually, it's a philosophy which rejects the Platonic ideas that we should discourse everything on terms of theory, on terms of intellectual discourse. What phenomenology tries to emphasize is that this theory was actually pioneered by Hegel and also later by Sartre. Now they try to say that we must analyze the subjective experience, that is the lived experience, that is the science of lived experience. The people who are living in Northeast, the people who are living in extreme regions of Kashmir, people who are living in in countries like Africa, Kazakhstan, their perspective, lived experience should be analyzed, and we should then try to explore what is nationalism to them. So Shilpi, I think, has grasped the comprehensive ideas of interdisciplinary ideas of, that's why she differentiated between rhetoric and ideas. So the idea that we claim to have and the realistic idea, the people that has been reflected in literature. So literature can't be just claimed as fiction. They very much reflect our phenomenology, our lived experience. So thanks to Professor Shilpi Boshak, and it's over to Dipanjan to move forward this session. Hello, Dipanjan.
Yes, yes. Thank you, Professor Bhadro, and thank you, Professor Basak, for such an enlightening session. Now, before going to the valedictory session, once more I would like to remind all participants that the feedback form will be sent to your valid email ID within 8 p.m. after checking your active participation to this webinar. If you were present thoroughly and do not get your link, then contact at the particular ID from where you have received your mail. The participants are once more requested to write your email ID, salutation, name, designation, institution properly, as it will be reflected as it is in your participation certificate. Now I would like to request Dr. Bhaskar Chatterjee, convener of this webinar and coordinator IQAC, Nabadwip Vidyasagar College, to deliver his valedictory speech and conclude the program. Dr. Chatterjee.
Hello,
Dr.
am I
Chatterjee,
audible?
can you hear me?
Yeah, am I
Yes,
audible?
yes, you're audible. Yes,
Thank
yes.
you, Dipanjan. So we are almost towards the end of this webinar session, and it has been a very nice session with interesting presentations. And in this context, I would like to extend my sincere thanks to the speakers, Professor Kumkum and Professor Shilpi Basak, who have spent the valuable time and with nice presentations. I would also like to thank the participants who have joined this webinar, and despite we have some technical issues regarding joining and for being with us. I would like to thank our principal, Dr. Shapan Kumar Rai, for extending his support all the time. And finally, I would like to thank the Department of English for the constant efforts in organizing such a wonderful webinar session. And finally, I would like to thank all of you for your patience. So we are concluding the webinar, and I will end.
Thank you all. Now I request all the participants from, not participants, actually the organizing committee from Department of English, including our principal sir and Bhaskar Chatterjee, and to be present here, and the rest, all the participants could leave this place. Thank you.